In the last video, I talked about the high science. I showed you how the stars connect to the sights and help navigate our stories through the metaphysical sciences, and ultimately how the cube becomes a key for connecting the hard sciences of the so below to the as above understanding of the overall invisible but already always functioning cycle of consciousness, and how the conscious field is impacted and our biology's ability to access it and receive it over time is mapped through all of these things, and how all of these work together to reveal an understanding of what humanity was attempting to continue to remind itself of, and that was the spiritual evolution of the species. And it is through the biological evolution of the species, the building and coming online of civilizations and cultures, and the creating of deeper understandings of the individual identifiable self, which builds the lower awareness of the biology. That's the memory systems that our species has been able to develop at a very high level. Because of that, we can create social connections and store information there, which is what makes this able to be passed on for a very long time. That process of building all of these connections, it's pivotal that it gets stored in something that is not short term alone, that is not based upon single civilization or group alone, that it is stored in the longest tail storage device that we have available to us. And that, in fact, is the first thing we're going to look at here. We're going to look at the stars. So the stars are the longest tail storage device that we have available to us. They don't change much over time. They are, in fact, the largest cave painting that humanity has available to it, and is the oldest manuscript known to mankind. When I show you the stars and how to look at them and begin to unravel them, you'll see that there is a deep story within them that can be connected to what our hard sciences understand as the human evolution or biological development of the species, as well as the psychological and sociological development of the species. And also within it holds a spiritual model for the species. This all creates what's called a biopsychosocial spiritual model, complete for humans to begin to operate and understand each aspect of the self. That's what's explored through the other aspects of this, but within the stars, we'll begin to see how this was mapped out. This is a map of the stars. It's just a two-dimensional perspective of different parts of the sky. So we have this thing called the ecliptic, and all the ecliptic is the path that the sun takes throughout the sky. Imagine that the stars are really just a blanket of dots, because that's what they are. They don't have any meaning. There's no purpose or function to them until we give them meaning, memory, purpose, and function. And we do that to create a coherence or an understanding of something. That's whenever we identify or create a form into something that is otherwise ambiguous, there's some sort of important reason to it. We want to remember something that helps our biology become aware of it. So what we did is we took the dots that the sun takes and follows throughout the backdrop. So as it goes on its path, it hits certain stars and configurations as it goes about, and we connected those dots and we put a story within them, and that becomes the zodiac. So we have the ecliptic, which is the path the sun takes, and then we have the zodiac, which is the stars that are the backdrop which that path of the sun falls in. It lays out the pathway that the sun takes, mapped out by the stars. That becomes the zodiac. Another thing to look at here is the pathway of the Milky Way galaxy. So we are in a part of an outer arm of the Milky Way galaxy. So from our perspective, it actually looks like a circle all the way around us. And that's because we're smack dab in the middle of this arm. But when we look at certain directions, we are looking in the direction of the center and away from it. When we look at the Milky Way galaxy, not only did we put the star patterns behind the ecliptic, we put star patterns on the Milky Way galaxy as well to begin to map it, and stars around it to show different things. So now we want to look at some important parts of the sky. The first main points are to look at where the ecliptic and the Milky Way galaxy intersect. It only happens at 2 points, and it's the 2 points where we are looking towards the center of the Milky Way galaxy and where we are looking away from the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So we're looking at the Milky Way center and the anti-center. We're looking out into space. Humanity decided to put 2 main star configurations at those places. We put a star configuration called Orion, which is directly underneath the anti-center of the Milky Way galaxy, and we put Ophiuchus over the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And these are polar signs. They are opposite each other in the sky. When one sets, another rises. I talk about this in other videos. Some other important constellations to look at besides the zodiac and those 2 signs. Something called Ursa Major. Ursa Major is important for many reasons. We use it today. It's the Big Dipper. We know it as the Bear. It's been called the Wheel or the Plow, but it's a very important constellation. It circles the North Star right for us right now, and is something that we have used for a very long time for navigational purposes. So it's been used by civilizations as something to track. Another one we'll look at is Hydra, because it underlies some important transitional periods. We will look at another sign called Cygnus. Cygnus is the bird that flies along the Milky Way galaxy. And we'll look at Draco. Draco is the snake that encircles the North Pole of the Earth. And these configurations of signs are used throughout traditions to begin to tell this story of the cycle of consciousness, because they are in important aspects of the sky and the horizon. 2 other points that I'll point to that you're not going to be able to see through the zodiac or the Milky Way, but we can begin to find and identify through different constellations, is the North and South Galactic Pole. Ursa Major and Virgo, right in between Ursa Major and Virgo, is the Northern Galactic Pole. Right underneath Pisces, in a sign called Sculptor, is the Southern Galactic Pole. Now, why this is important is because it creates cardinal directions for the galactic plane, which we'll explore in a little bit. Now, all of these signs create a long tail storage device for tracking and keeping of time. Now, why would you want to do that? Some reasons were to track the seasons, to understand where we were and what was coming and what would be happening, when to plant, when to do things. But also, we'll find out it was to track something much longer and bigger. And that's the cycle of human consciousness, because there are certain aspects of this sky map that you have no purpose in tracking. So now what we're going to do is take these signs that we've just talked about and how we got them, and begin to explore the meanings that we put into them and how this connects to this overall high science idea. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply a model that I created and break down these signs and these aspects of the sky a little bit better so that you can understand how all of this fits. That model defines the epochs that humanity goes through in the combination of 3 zodiac signs: Hunter, Hero, Hierophant, and Healer. When we broke apart the zodiac, it actually has different meanings with each sign. This is very deep, and I won't go into this here, but there are cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs, and we can delineate them, and those create an actual stage of reference within this larger science. The Hunter aspect starts with Virgo, goes through Leo and Cancer. The Hero goes from Gemini to Taurus to Aries. Then the Hierophant through Pisces, Aquarius, and Capricorn. And the Healer, Sagittarius, Scorpio, and Libra. We're going to look at first the two main archetypes, Orion and Ophiuchus. Now you can see that right at the beginning of the hero, Orion emerges, and right around the beginning of the healer, Ophiuchus emerges. So right smack dab in the middle of these two epics is when we put those two archetypes in the sky, and it maps the two crossings of the galactic plane in reference to the ecliptic, so the path the sun takes. These two markings map the two main functions of our neurobiology. Orion is a star pattern that has his hands raised. We can see that at the earliest sites that we had, we were mapping this. So this is a picture of the Sayburk man. It is near Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and it is a man with hands raised in reference to a bull. And that's Orion and Taurus. So the man with hands raised is the sympathetic nervous system. It's the fight or flight. This is also correlate to when we go into the darkened stage of the consciousness cycle. And how I'll help you understand that is through this, the cycle of human consciousness that is kept in India, and that's called the Yuga cycle. And this is a mapping of the way that human consciousness changes over these ages. So with the epic changes that I have with the hunter, hero, hierophant, healer, you can also break each zodiac sign into a specific age in reference to precession. Precession is the idea that the sun moves 1 degree every 72 years backwards through this cycle. And when we look at the zodiac through that pathway, we see that the Virgin, Virgo, the beginning, the new portion of the cycle, as you can see with the Yuga cycle being at the height of its time period, the Virgin beginning of the cycle moves into creating the king of the jungle, Leo, this identifiable left brain, conscious function, and then Cancer, the emotional inner self. So they have the external self and the internal self. That builds the identity awareness of the hunter. Now that we have those two selves, then it moves to Gemini. We begin to build deep connection and communication. That's what Gemini means. And then Taurus is the domestication and the civilization of cultures and the development of cultures. And then ultimately it produces Aries, this identifiable, individualized self that we experience as the hero. It's our own intellectual awareness of who we are. It's heart in my case. And so you can see that as we read the zodiac through precession, so we read it backwards, it actually talks about the coming online of the two hemispheres of our brain. And it follows the path of the cycle of consciousness of mankind going in away from the unified spiritual self to a more individualized, isolated self, which is brought on by the sympathetic nervous system marked by Orion. Now, I understand that this can seem really kind of reaching and far-fetched, but now let me put up a picture of the galactic plane. And you can see that when we come into this darkened phase, we are crossing from the northern galactic pole, which when we were at the peak and closest to it in Virgo, we were at the height. And then as we start to approach the galactic plane and go under the galactic plane towards the south pole, we go into darkness. And in all of our major traditions, it talks about man going into the underworld, the hero needing to go and rescue and recall and remember and get the boon. All of these traditional symbols were the remembering of mankind going into this darkness in reference to the cycle of human consciousness. And then as we make the round, we can see that we come up through Pisces. Pisces and Aries are where we are most closest. Pisces is where we're most closest to the southern galactic pole, as I pointed out earlier in the map. And then we transition towards Sagittarius at the center of the Milky Way galaxy and Ophiuchus and crossing the plane again into the northern pole, coming into the light. Now we are in alignment with the center of the Milky Way galaxy, coming into the northern galactic pole. So we can see that this idea of Virgo, Gemini, Pisces, and Sagittarius have very deep connections to the cycle of human consciousness and these two main aspects of Orion and Ophiuchus, because Orion is the sympathetic nervous system, man with hands raised, fight or flight, I'm going to fight you, or oh, I'm scared of you. And then Ophiuchus, when we look at him, we can see he's got his hands across his belly in this earliest tradition of the Saberk man, but also he's holding snakes in the way that we see it. And that snake is Hydra, this idea of the lower reptilian self, and it is Draco, that higher awareness, coming back online, and the transcendence of that reptilian nature when we understand the myths and the reclaiming of the garden and the rescuing of the golden apples, which Draco is representative of in the mythologies in the garden. Why all of this is important is because it directly maps a process of human development and how the cosmology and how the astrophysics actually impact the biology, because we can correlate and connect how the cycle of consciousness, as mapped out through the ecliptic, aligns with the galactic plane and how we interact with certain aspects of the galaxy, and how that directly correlates to how it impacts our neurobiology and the conscious field that is underlying, that it is attempting to access. Because ultimately we understand that evolution of the species revolves around awareness, and the greater awareness you have means the more consciousness you've accessed. The more consciousness you've accessed, the greater you have for survival. Thereby, patterns that can access greater consciousness are passed on, and them being passed on create greater patterns, which then play out and are able to access consciousness more fully. This goes through patterns that's of the earlier species on this planet, the reptiles, and then the mammalian, and then now the human neocortex. These are greater patterns of genetic expression that are able to access the conscious field in higher and higher ways. And we can see that it is the galaxy and our reference to it that impacts that somehow. And it was mapped in the stars by the way that we explained these archetypes, and we mapped it out through the zodiac and the galactic constellations. What we're going to do now is take a look at how we continue to pass on this information through the ancient sites and how they're connected to the terrestrial models of this high science on our planet. I'm going to show you connections and discoveries that all of this research was able to help me find at Göbekli Tepe and many other archaeoastronomical sites throughout human history and around the world, and they match perfectly to this one-to-one. That'll be in the next video, so make sure to subscribe and check it out, because it's going to be just as mind-blowing as this one.